The heat that August was a cruel, relentless thing. It clung to the asphalt of Maple Street like a fever, shimmering in waves that distorted the neat rows of houses. It seeped through the thin walls of the little bungalow I rented from my mother. A house that had never quite felt like home, only a holding cell. The air conditioner, a wheezing relic from the Joshes, labored in the window, pushing out a pathetic whisper of cool air that did little more than stir the dust motes dancing in the late afternoon sun. The whole place smelled of stale regret and the faint, cloying perfume of the lilies my mother insisted on planting by the front door, a floral reminder of her constant, suffocating presence. I was in the middle of scrubbing the kitchen counters. A nervous habit I'd developed to cope with the simmering anxiety she always managed to stir in me. When the text message came, it was a prelude to the storm, a single, ominous chord before the orchestra of chaos began its assault. Be home at 6, we need to talk. That was it, no greeting, no vur, just the cold, bureaucratic demand of a woman who had never seen me as a daughter, but as a long-term investment. I read at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. My Muvelin had perfected the art of the ambush. She never called to check in, to ask how I was. She only summoned, and I, the loyal, foolish daughter, always came running. This time, I felt a flicker of defiance, a small ember that had been smoldering in my chest for years. I almost typed back, about, but the memory of 100 other talks flashed before my eyes, each one a fresh humiliation, a new demand, a deeper cut. I put the phone down and returned to my scrubbing, the rhythmic motion a futile attempt to scrub the dread from my skin. At exactly 6 o'clock, the front door swung open without a knock. She walked in like she owned the place, which, legally, she did. Evelyn Vance was a tall, formidable woman with a razor-sharp bob of silver hair and an expression that could curdle milk. She wore a cream-colored linen suit that must have cost a small fortune, a stark contrast to my worn-out jeans and faded shirt. Her heels clicked in authoritative rhythm on the linoleum floor, a sound that always preceded a lecture, a judgment, a punishment. She didn't sit, she never sat. She stood in the center of my tiny kitchen, surveying the space like a general surveying a conquered territory, and launched her offensive. She began, using my full name with a distinct note of disdain. I've been patient, I've been understanding, but I can't continue to subsidize your lifestyle. It's time you lay round the value of $1. My stomach dropped, I knew what was coming. This was the main event. The knockout punch she'd been telegraphing for months. Mum, what are you talking about? I pay you rent every month. I've never missed a payment. Rent, she scoffed, a sharp, brittle sound. She pulled a piece of paper from her designer handbag and smoothed it out on the counter. It was an itemized list. Let's call it what it really is, a fraction of the cost. The mortgage is $2,400 a month. You give me $900. That doesn't even cover the property taxes. Do you know how much the taxes are on this property? I felt the blood drain from my face. My hands, resting on the cool granite, began to tremble. We had an agreement. You said I could live here for $900 a month while I got on my feet. That was years ago. A lot. You're still on your feet. You're a waitress, for God's sake. How many more years do you expect me to see you? She tapped the paper with a manicured nail. This is the back rent you owe me. 3 years of what you should have been paying. It comes to $30,000. I need it by the end of the month. The number hung in the air like a guillotine blade. $30,000. I was making minimum wage plus tips, eerily scraping by as it was. My entire emergency, the meager savings I'd managed to squirrel away for a rainy day, amounted to less than $400. This wasn't a request, it was an execution. $30,000, Mom, that's impossible. You know I don't have that kind of money. I can't just. Then I'm selling your car. Her voice was flat matter of fact. She might have been announcing that she was having a garage sale. The words didn't register at first. You can't sell my car. I need it for work. I need it to get to the store, to go anywhere. The car is in my name. The title is in my name. It has always been in my name, as a security measure. You've been driving it this whole time, but it's my asset. You failed to pay your debts, and I'm liquidating the asset. This was the kill shot. The CR was my life. It was an old but reliable Honda Civic, nothing special, but it was my freedom. It was the only thing that separated me from being trapped in this house, in this life, under her thumb. Without it, I'd lose the only income I had. I'd be completely and utterly dependent on her, which was exactly what she wanted. The ember of defiance in my chest flared red into a blinding, hot rage. You can't do this, I whispered, but my voice was shaking. This is my life. This is how I survive. You're not just taking my car. You're taking everything. I'm teaching you a lesson, she said, her eyes cold and unsympathetic. You should have listened to me. You should have ride Peter when you had the chance. But no, you had to be independent. Look where that got you, a waitress, living in a hovel, with nothing to show for it. I am not going to let you drag me down with you. Something inside me cracked, the wall of forced compliance, the years of biting my tongue and swallowing my pride, collapsed under the weight of her cruelty. I met it, and for the first time in my life, I didn't look away. My voice, when it came, was low and steady, a dangerous calm I didn't know I possessed. You were a bully, I said. You have been my entire life. You never wanted a daughter, you wanted a puppet. A little doll you could dress up and trot out to impress your friends. And the minute I stopped being your little accessory, you started to despise me. She blinked, a flicker of surprise in her cold eyes. She wasn't used to this. She wasn't used to a fight. You think that car is your weapon? I continued, taking a step closer, my heart pounding against my ribs. You think taking it will break me? Go ahead, sell it. Take the $3,000 it's worth. It won't even make a dent in that fantasy you call a debt. But I want you to remember this moment. I could see it in her face, the micro-expressions, the slight tightening of her jaw, the faint crease between her perfectly shaped brows. She was reassessing the situation. The prey was fighting back. You have no idea what I'm capable of, I said, spitting the last word out like it was a curse. You spent your whole life telling me I was a failure. But you never bothered to look in the mirror. You have what? Oh, a membership to the country club. And a husband who can't stand the sight of you. You're a successful woman, Evelyn, but you're a miserable, lonely, pathetic excuse for a mother. The truth of the words hung in the air. Dark and acidic. She took a step back, her composure cracking at the edges. She looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. The power dynamic, so stable for decades, had just shifted. She had thrown the first punch, but I had thrown the counter. Without another word, she turned on her heel and walked out the door, slamming it behind her. The sound reverberated through the house, the final echo of a threat. I stood there, trembling, my heart hammering, my ears ringing. I had done it. I had stood up to her. It didn't feel liberating. It felt terrifying. I had just declared war on the most dangerous person I knew. I looked out the window, at my little Honda Civic, sitting defenselessly in the driveway. It was a link to the real world, a symbol of the fragile independence I had fought so hard to build. She would take it. I knew she would. She wasn't bluffing. She was going to strip me of everything, piece by piece, until I was back on my knees, begging for scrap. I slumped onto the old lumpy sofa. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving me hollow and exhausted. I felt a hot tear trace a path down my cheek, then another. I let them fall. For a brief moment, I allowed myself the luxury of self-pity, of grief for the life I was about to lose. But I had been crying my entire life, and it had never changed a thing. I looked down at the itemized list she had left on the counter. It was brutal in its detail, a cold, calculated assault on my worth. On a whim, I turned it over. On the back, scribbled in her handwriting, was a note. It wasn't meant for me. It looked like a reminder for herself. A single, property purchase at 14 Cedar Court. Investor deal. I squinted at it. 14 Cedar Court. I knew that address. It was a run-down property at the edge of town. An abandoned Victorian mansion that had been on the market for years. A local mystery. Why was my mother, who was so careful with her money, looking at an investment deal for a condemned piece of history? It didn't make sense. The property was worthless, a money pit, or was it? I pulled out my phone and started searching. The mansion was shrouded in rumors. A wealthy family who had disappeared. Whispers of a hidden fortune. Most people dismissed it as gossip, a ghost story for tourists. But my mother wasn't the type to chase ghosts. She was the type to bury bodies. If she was interested in 14 Cedar, there had to be something more. A seed of an idea began to germinate in my mind, pushing aside the fear and the dread. It was a wild, desperate, almost insane idea. If she could threaten to take my car, to destroy my life, she was playing a game of demolition. But what if I could take something from her? Something she wanted more than money. What if I could find out why she really wanted that property, and what secrets it held? I had lost my financial safety net. I had lost the illusion of a relationship with my mother. But I had gained something else. I had lost my... The next morning, the car was gone. I called the police, but they couldn't do anything. It was her car. She had the title. My job, my fragile little world, was gone. My boss was understanding but practical. He had to give my shifts to someone else. I was officially, utterly adrift. I stood on my porch, the morning sun doing little to warm the chill in my bones. The house felt even smaller, emptier. My mother had left me with nothing but a threat and a note. I pulled that crumpled piece of paper from my pocket, and read the address again. 14 Sidar Court. The property was a legend, a place locals avoided after dark, but my mother wasn't afraid of ghosts. She was afraid of losing money. And she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. She had made me her enemy. I was no longer a victim, I was a threat, and I was about to uncover the secret she had been so desperate to bury at 14 Sidar Court, a secret that would bring her world crashing down around her perfectly manicured ears. The ember of defiance was now a wildfire, and it was ready to burn. The walk to Sidar Court took 45 minutes on foot, a journey that ride me from the familiar, manicured suburbs of my mother's world into the forgotten edges of town where the sidewalks cracked and the streetlights grew sparse. I had no bus fare, and no intention of asking anyone for help. This was my mission now, and I would see it through on my own 2 feet. The mansion at 14 Sidar Court loomed at the end of a long, overgrown drive, a Gothic skeleton of what had once been a architectural splendor. The Victorian bones were still there. The turrets, the wrap-around porch, the intricate gingerbread trim that now hung in rotting fragments. Vines had claimed the facade, creeping up the weathered clapboard like green veins. The windows were dark, some shattered, others boarded up with gear plywood. It smelled of wetty rot and decay, a scent that clung to the back of my throat. I stood at the wrought iron gate, which hung crookedly on one hinge, and peered into the property. A for sale sign tilted in the overgrown grass, its lettering faded by years of sun and rain. The realtor's name was still legible, H.A. Rinnan Associate, my mother's preferred agency of course. Why would she want this place? I muttered to myself, pushing the gate open with a screech of rusted metal. The yard was a jungle of weeds and wild blackberry bushes. I picked my way through, my sneakers squelching in the damp wrath. The front porch groaned under my weight, the wooden planks soft and treacherous. I tested the front door, expecting it to be locked, but the knob turned easily in my hand. The door swung open with a long, mournful creak, revealing a cavernous foyer swallowed in shadows. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that pierced through the grime-caked windows. A grand staircase curved up its banister carved with elaborate floral motifs, now dulled by decades of neglect. The wallpaper, once a rich burgundy, hung in peeling strip, revealing water-stained plaster beneath. A crystal chandelier, draped in cobwebs like a ghostly wedding veil, sagged from the ceiling, its missing crystals scattered across the floor like fallen tars. I stepped in, my footsteps echoing in the hollow silence. The air was cold and still, thick with the musty scent of old wood and forgotten lives. I shivered, but not from the cold. This place felt like a mausoleum, a monument to a tragedy I didn't yet understand. My mother's note had said, investor deal. But what kind of investor would want a property in this condition? Unless she knew something I didn't. Unless she knew about the rumors. I started exploring the ground floor, moving from room to room with the cautious curiosity of an archaeologist. The pier-roller was empty, save for a fireplace mantel that had once been magnificent, now skia-red by water damp. The dining room featured a massive oak table, its surface littered with debris, broken glass, fallen plaster. I stopped mid-stride. A single piece of paper, yellowed and curled at the edges, lay near a far end. I picked it up with trembling fingers. It was a letter, typed on old-fashioned stationery. The letterhead read, Sidar Court Estate, in elegant script. The contents were brief, but they sent a jolt of electricity through my veins. Natini, to the executor of the estate, per our agreement, the contents of the safe deposit box at the First National Bank shall be transferred to the designated beneficiary upon the completion of the said AR court transaction. The sum of 200,000 is to remain in trust until. The letter ended abruptly, the rest torn away. I read at the fragment, my mind racing. $2.5 million a trust, a safe deposit. This wasn't just a decrepit old house. This was a treasure chest. And my mother was trying to get her hands on it. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into my back pocket. I needed to know more. I climbed the creaking staircase to the second floor, each step groaning in protest. The hallway was lined with doors, some open, some closed. I pushed open the first one and found a bedroom. The bed was still made, the sheets rotted into tatters, the mattress sagging like a dead animal. A child's rocking horse sat in the corner, its paint chipped, one eye missing. It was here rot-breaking and eerie in equal measure. The next room was a study. Bookshelves lined the walls, their contents long since looted or decayed. A desk sat in the center, its surface covered in a fine layer of dust and debris. I pulled open the drawers, finding nothing but old correspondence and moth-eaten papers. I was about to give up when I noticed the desk had a false bottom. My heart hammered as I pried it open with a key I found in the top drawer. Inside was a leather-bound ledger, its pages filled with neat, precise handwriting. It documented a series of financial transactions, all tied to the estate, all moving through shell companies and offshore accounts. The name that Appy read most frequently was one I knew intimately. My mother had been connected to this property for decades. She had been siphoning money from it. Somehow, all while presenting herself as a self-made woman. The house, the CA, the country club membership. It wasn't from my father's inheritance or her savvy investments. It was stolen from the ruins of this forgotten mansion, built on the bones of a family that had vanished without a trace. I also felt a exhilarating thrill. I had the evidence. I had the key to her undoing. I sat on the dusty floor, the ledger in my lap, my mind whirling. What was I going to do with this? Confront her, go to the police, call a lawyer. Each option ride its own risk. If I confronted her, she would destroy the evidence, claim I was lying, paint me as the unstable daughter once again. If I went to the police, I would need proof that she was actually involved in the fraud, not just a name on a ledger. But then I saw the name at the bottom of one of the entries, a name that made my blood run cold. Peter, my mother's lawyer, her confidant, the man she had tried to push me into marrying. I hadn't known he was involved in her financial dealings. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just about my mother. This was a network, a conspiracy of silence and greed. I closed the ledger and stashed it in my bag, along with the letter. I needed to get out of this house. It was starting to feel less like a ruin and more like a trap, its walls closing in around me. I hurried down the stairs, my footsteps echoing too loudly in the silence. As I reached the foyer, I heard it, the crunch of gravel outside. I froze. Someone was coming up the driveway. I pressed myself against the wall, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it could be through the rotting wood. A tear engine cut off, followed by the slam of a door, footsteps on the porch, a key in the lock. The front door swung open, and my mother stepped inside, her face a mask of cold fury. She said, her voice dripping with venom, "I thought I might find you here." I had been so fearful. How did she know? I saw the security camera mounted in the corner of the foyer. A tiny, modern device hidden among the cobwebs. Of course she had eyes on this place. She had been watching me the whole time. "Mom," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I can explain." "Explain what, exactly?" "That you're breaking and entering. That you're stealing from me." She stepped closer, her heels clicking ominously on the dusty floor. "You think you found something, don't you? You think you have leverage. But you have no idea what you're dealing with." "I know about the trust," I said, holding my ground. "I know about the money. And I know about Peter." Her eyes flickered, just for a second. A brief crack in her armor, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, calculating calm. "Peter will be here in 10 minutes, she said, "and when he arrives, we're going to have a very long conversation about what you think you know, and what you're going to keep to yourself." She reached into her handbag and pulled out a taser. The sight of it made my stomach drop. "I've always known you were a disappointment," she said. "But I never thought you were a thief." I could feel the panic rising in my chest, the primal urge to run. But running was exactly what she wanted. Running would mean I was afraid, that I was weak, that she had won. I thought of the little the job, the years of gaslighting. I thought of Peter, the man she had tried to force me into a life with. I had been running my whole life, and look where it had gotten me, nowhere. I looked her in the eye, and I made a decision. 10 minutes, I said. "I'll wait. But I want you to think about something, Mom. I have proof, I have documents, and if anything happens to me, they will be sent to every news outlet, every police station, every lawyer in the state. You won't just lose this house. You'll lose everything. The life you built, the reputation you've spent decades protecting. All of it." I stepped past her, out onto the porch, into the fading light of the afternoon. She didn't follow. I could feel her eyes boring into my back, her rage a palpable heat, but I didn't run. I walked slowly, calm, like I was in control. The old Charlotte would have cried, would have begged, would have apologized, but I wasn't her anymore. I was the woman who had found the truth. And I was about to burn her world to the ground. The evening air was thick and heavy as I walked away from 14 Cedar Court, each step carrying me further from the crumbling mansion and closer to an uncertain future. My legs trembled beneath me, adrenaline still coursing through my veins like wildfire. I had faced my mother in that haunted foyer and I had not broken. But the battle was far from over. I could feel it in my bones, a deep, primal knowing that the calm I was walking into was merely the eye of the storm. I didn't go back to the bungalow. It wasn't safe there anymore. My mother had keys, and Peter had connections. Instead, I walked to the only place I could think of, the 24-hour diner on the edge of town where I used to work. It was a greasy spoon with cracked vinyl booths, and fluorescent lights that hummed with a nervous energy. But it was public and it was familiar. I needed time to think, to plan, to figure out my next move. The diner was nearly empty at this hour. A lone trucker nursed a cup of coffee at the counter, and a teenage couple giggled in a corner booth. I slid into a seat near the window, the worn red vinyl sticking to my jeans, and ordered a black coffee I had no intention of drinking. I pulled the leather-bound ledger from my bag and spread it open on the sticky table, my eyes scanning the entries I had already memorized. Evelyn Vance's name Appy read again and again, each entry a thread in a web of deception that stretched back decades. There were payments to shell companies, transfers to offshore accounts, and cryptic notations that referenced CDR Court Holdings and the trust. The sums were staggering. This wasn't just a few $1,000s skimmed here and there. This was a systematic looting of an estate, a fortune built on the ruins of a family that had disappeared into the shadows of history. I thought about the letter I had found, the fragment that mentioned a safe deposit box and $2.5 million ARs. Where was that money now? Had my mother already claimed it, or was it still waiting, hidden away in some vault, untouched and undetected? And what about Peter? What was his role in all of this? My mother had said he would be arriving at the mansion in 10 minutes. They had been working together for years, perhaps longer than I had ever imagined. My phone buzzed, jolting me out of my thoughts. I glanced at the screen and felt my blood run cold. It was a text message from an unknown number. But I knew who it was before I even opened it. Shiwad, it's Peter. Your mother told me what happened. We need to talk. Let's not do anything rash. There's so much you don't understand. Meet me at the diner in an hour. Don't tell anyone. This is for your own good. I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the screen. My first instinct was to delete it, to block the number, to run as far away from Peter as I could. He was a shark, always circling, always waiting for a moment of weakness. But then I thought of the ledger, the letter, the pieces of a puzzle that were slowly coming together. Peter was a key player in this conspiracy. If I could get him to talk, to slip up, I might be able to fill in the gaps I was missing. I didn't respond. I tucked the ledger back into my bag and waited. An hour later, the diner's door swung open, and Peter walked in. He looked the same as he always did. Immaculate in his tailored suit, his silver hair perfectly combed, his smile practiced and disarming. He slid into the booth across from me, his eyes scanning my face with a mixture of concern and calculation. He said, his voice firm and condescending, "I'm glad you came." "Did I have a choice?" I replied, my tongue. He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "You always have a choice. I'm here because I want to help you. I know you've been through a lot, and I know your mother can be difficult, but she's not your enemy, Chayralat. She's trying to protect you, in her own way." "Protect me?" I laughed, the sound bitter and sharp. "She threatened to sell my car. She's charging me $30,000 in back rent. She's been stealing from a dead family's estate for decades. And you want me to believe she's trying to protect me?" Peter's smile faltered, his eyes flickered to my bag, where the corner of the ledger peeked out. He knew, of course he knew. He had probably been monitoring the mansion's cameras alongside my mother, watching me stumble onto their secrets like a mouse in a trap. He said, leaning forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "That ledger is not what you think it is. There are things you don't understand. Things that could put you in danger if you're not careful." "I'm already in danger," I said, my voice. "You and my mother have made sure of that. But I'm not going to be intimidated. I'm not going to back down. I have proof of fraud, proof of theft, and I'm not afraid to use it." Peter's expression shifted, the charming mask slipped, revealing something a rodder beneath. "What do you want, Chayralat?" "I want the truth," I said. "I want to know what happened to the family who lived at said AR court. I want to know where the money went. And I want to know what you and my mother are so desperate to hide." Peter was silent for a long moment. He stared at me, his eyes unreadable, and I could see the GARs turning in his mind. He was weighing his options, calculating his next move. "Your mother and I," he began slowly. "We didn't steal that money, recovered it. The family that owned CDR Court was involved in some very illegal activities, drug trafficking, money laundering. The kind of things that get people killed. Your mother and I worked together to shut it down. The money in the trust was supposed to go to the authorities, but there was a mistake, a clerical error. and by the time we realized what had happened, it was too late to come forward without implicating ourselves. I stared at him, my mind reeling. It was a story. A carefully constructed lie designed to make him and my mother look like reluctant heroes. But there were holes in it. Gaps that I could see even through the haze of his words. If that's true, I said, then you have nothing to hide. You can come forward now. You can explain everything to the police, to the courts, to whoever you need to. But you're not doing that. You're threatening me. You're trying to silence me. And that's not the behavior of innocent people. Peter's jaw tightened. He had underestimated me, and I could see the realization dawning on his face. I wasn't the scared, compliant girl he had once known. I was a woman with nothing left to lose. He said, his voice cold now, if you pursue this, you will destroy not only your mother but yourself. Do you have any idea what will happen when this comes to light? The media will descend. Your life will be torn apart. You will be painted as a traitor, a disgruntled daughter seeking revenge. No one will believe you. They might not believe me, I said, but they'll believe the evidence. And I have plenty of it. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. I had taken photos of every page in the ledger, every piece of evidence I had found. I had even recorded the conversation we were having right now, hidden in the pocket of my jacket. A secret weapon I had activated before he had walked in. I said, I have everything. The ledger, the letter, and now this recording of you admitting that you and my mother were involved in a cover-up. If you or my mother try to hurt me, if you try to take anything else from me, I will send all of this to the police. I will send it to the press. I will make sure your names are dragged through the mud so thoroughly that you'll never recover. Peter's face went pale. He looked at me, truly looked at me, and I saw the fear in his eyes. It was a small victory, but it was mine. You wouldn't, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I replied. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the linoleum floor. His composure was gone, replaced by a barely restrained rage. You're making a mistake, Charlotte. Your mother and I have resources you can't imagine. We will fight you, and we will win. Then go ahead, I said, my voice calm and measured. Fight me, but remember, I'm not the girl you used to push around. I'm not the woman who believed every lie my mother told me. I'm something else now, something you created. And I'm not going to stop until I get the truth. Peter turned and walked out of the diner, his footsteps heavy and furious. I watched him through the window as he climbed into his sleek black sedan and peeled out of the parking lot, tires squealing against the asphalt. I leaned back in the booth, my heart pounding, my hands trembling. I had just crossed a line, and I knew there was no going back. I had declared AR on two of the most dangerous people I knew. And I had done it without a safety net. But as I looked down at the ledger, at the evidence scattered across the table, I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. I had a weapon now, and I wasn't afraid to use it. My phone buzzed again, a text from an unknown number. Midnight. Come alone. I know the truth. And I'm willing to share it. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Who was this? Another alley, or another trap? I thought of Peter and my mother, of the lies and the threats and the secrets they had buried for decades. I knew I was walking into a game I didn't fully understand, but I also knew I had no choice. I grabbed my bag and slid out of the booth, leaving the coffee untouched on the table. The night stretched out before me, dark, but for the first time in my life, I felt ready to face it. The clock on the diner wall read 11:15. I had 45 minutes to decide if I was going to walk into the lion's den or run away and live to fight another day. But I already knew my answer. I wasn't a runner anymore. I was a fighter, and at midnight, I was going to find out exactly who else was playing this game. The walk to said AR court at midnight was a journey into another world entirely. The streets I had traversed in daylight were transformed by darkness into something unfamiliar and menacing. The streetlights were few and far between, casting pools of sickly yellow light that did little to penetrate the oppressive blackness between them. The moon was a thin crescent, barely visible behind a veil of clouds, offering no guidance, no comfort. I had changed my clothes before leaving the diner, trading my jeans for dark leggings and a black hoodie. I wasn't dressed for comfort, I was dressed for invisibility. The ledger was tucked into a waterproof pouch beneath my jacket, and my phone was fully charged, its recording app ready to capture whatever I was about to walk into. My mind churned with possibilities. Who had sent that text? Was it someone trying to help me? Or was it another trap laid by my mother and Peter? The message had been cryptic, devoid of grammar or familiarity. I know the truth, and I'm willing to share it. Those words could mean anything. They could be a lifeline or a noose. The mansion loomed before me, its silhouette jagged against the starless sky. The windows were darker even than the night around them, as if they were absorbing the last traces of light. The for sale sign creaked in the breeze, a mournful sound that echoed through the empty yard. I hesitated at the gate, my hand resting on the cold iron, and took a deep breath. This was the moment, the point of no return. I pushed the gate open and walked up the overgrown path. The porch groaned beneath my weight, just as it had hours earlier, but this time I didn't stop to examine the details. I went straight for the front door, which was standing slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness beckoning me inside. I stepped through the threshold and into the foyer. The air was colder than before, thick with a stillness that felt almost watchful. My footsteps echoed on the dusty floor, each one a small betrayal of my presence. I pulled out my phone and switched on the flashlight, sweeping its beam across the room. The foyer was unchanged, the same peeling wallpaper, the same sagging chandelier. But there was something new, a set of footprints in the dust, leading from the front door to the grand staircase. They were fresh, smaller than mine, too delicate to belong to my mother or Peter. I followed them upstairs, my hair pounding in my ears. The stairs groaned with each step, the sound like a ring at the top. The footprints led down the hallway to the study, the room where I had found the ledger. The door was open, and a faint light flickered from within. I stepped into the doorway and saw a figure sitting at the desk, illuminated by the glow of a single candle. It was a woman young, with deer gray hair and haunted eyes. She looked up as I entered, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. She said finally, her voice soft but steady. I'm glad you came. You? I asked, my grip tightening on my phone. How do you know my name? The woman stood, moving with a grace that seemed out of place in the crumbling study. She was dressed in simple clothes, a black sweater and jeans. But there was something about her that spoke of wealth and privilege. A carefully cultivated poise that she had clearly been raised with. My name is Clara, she said. Clara Ashford. This was my family's house. The words hit me like a physical blow. The Ashfords, the family that had vanished. The family whose fortune my mother had been pilfering for decades. I stared, searching her face for signs of deception. But all I saw was exhaustion and grief. The Ashfords disappeared, I said slowly. Everyone assumed they died in the fire. Clara's lips twisted into a bitter smile. That's what they wanted everyone to think. My father, my mother, my brothers, they're all still alive, but they've been hiding for years, running from the people who destroyed us. What happened here? Clara motioned for me to sit. I hesitated, then lowered myself onto a dusty chair across from her. She sat back down at the desk, her fingers tracing the edge of the ledger I had left behind. Your mother and Peter, she began. They didn't just steal from us. They worked with the people who were trying to kill us. My father was a businessman, a successful one, but he was also naive. He trusted the wrong people. He got involved with a syndicate that used his company to launder money. When he realized what was happening, he tried to back out. He tried to expose them. She paused, her gaze distant, lost in a memory that clearly still caused her pain. Your mother was his lawyer's assistant at the time. She continued. Peter was the lawyer. They were the ones who leaked information about his plan to the syndicate. They told them my father was going to the police. The syndicate sent men to our house. My parents went into hiding. I was sent to live with relatives overseas. I felt my mother had been complicit in a conspiracy that had destroyed an entire family. She had been just a few years older than me, but she had already been willing to sacrifice innocent lives for money. And Peter, he had been the orchestrator, the mastermind behind it all. The money, I said, my voice hoarse. The trust, it was supposed to be yours, wasn't it? Clara nodded. $2.5 million. It was my inheritance. The only thing my father could salvage before we fled. Your mother and Peter found out about it. They made sure the safe deposit box never reached us. They've been bleeding it dry for years. I thought of the ledger, the meticulous records of every transaction. My mother hadn't just taken the money, she had documented it, kept track of every cent as if it were a trophy. The sheer arrogance of it made my blood boil. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Why did you reach out to me? Clara met my eyes, and I saw the desperation in them. Because you're my only hope. I've tried to go to the police. I've tried to hire lawyers. But your mother and Peter have connections everywhere. They've buried the evidence so deep that no one can find it. But you have the ledger. You have proof that can't be refuted. If we work together, we can finally bring them down. I silenced, the weight of her words pressing down on me. She was asking me to take on the most powerful people I knew. people who had already demonstrated that they would stop at nothing to protect themselves. But she was also offering me something I had never had before. An ally. The text you sent me, I said slowly. How did you know I was looking into this? I've been watching the house, Clara admitted. I knew your mother was coming here. I saw you leave with the ledger. I recognized what it was. My father kept meticulous records. That ledger was his life's work. I nodded. Processing the information, it was a risk, trusting a woman I had just met, but I had already taken so many risks. What was one more, Kay? I said. Tell me everything. Tell me how we take them down. Clara's face broke into a smile, the first genuine expression I had seen from her. She reached into her bag and pulled out a thick folder, stuffed with documents and photographs. She spread them across the desk, her hands moving with an urgency that matched my own. This is everything, she said. Bank statements, witness testimony, copies of the original trust documents. I've been gathering evidence for years, but I could never get close enough to the people who held the real proof. You have that proof. Together, we have a complete case. We spent the next hour going through the documents, cross-referencing them with the entries in the ledger. The picture that emerged was more damning than I had ever imagined. My mother and Peter hadn't just stolen money, they had destroyed lives, ruined reputations, and covered their tracks with a web of lies so intricate that it had taken years to unravel. As dawn began to creep over the horizon, I looked up from the papers and met Clara's eyes. We were both exhausted, but we were also both alive with a renewed sense of purpose. Tomorrow morning, I said, we go to the police, we bring all of this with us, and we tell them everything. It won't be easy. They'll fight us every step of the way. Let them, I said. I've been fighting my entire life. I'm not going to stop now. We packed up the documents and made our way out of the mansion, stepping into the pale gray light of morning. The air was cool and damp, saying the promise of a new day. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe. But as we reached the gate, I heard a sound that made my blood freeze. The crunch of gravel, the hum of an engine. A black sedan was pulling up the driveway, its headlights cutting through the mist like a knife. I grabbed Clara's arm and pulled her behind a cluster of overgrown bushes. We crouched in the shadows, watching as the car came to a stop. The door opened, and Peter stepped out. He was alone, his face pale and tense. But he wasn't heading for the mansion. He was heading for the gate. He was coming for us. He called out, his voice echoing in the stillness. I know you're here, I know about Clara, I know everything. But I also know you're not the only one who's been betrayed. I glanced at Tara, who looked equally confused and terrified. Peter's words were calculated, designed to draw me out. I could see the trap, but I also saw an opportunity. He had slipped up, he had come alone. Stay here, I whispered to Clara. No matter what happens, don't come out. I stood up and stepped out from behind the bushes, meeting Peter's gaze in the dim light. He looked at me, and for a moment, I saw something I had never seen in his eyes before. Fear, what do you want, Peter? I asked, my voice steady. He took a step toward Robbie, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. I want to make a deal, a real deal. I have information, Che-Relat. Information about your mother that will destroy her forever. I'll give it to you, all of it. In exchange, I walk away from this, I disappear. You never see me again. I stared at him, my mind racing. He was betraying my mother. He was offering her up on a silver platter. It was the ultimate act of self-preservation, and it was also a trap. Why should I trust you? I asked. Because I have no other choice, he said, his voice cracking. Your mother has been threatening me for years. She has evidence that would put me in prison for life. I'm done being her puppet. I'm done being her scapegoat. I want out. And I'll do whatever it takes to get there. I looked at him, at the desperation etched into his face, and I made a decision. I didn't trust him. I would never trust him, but I could use him. I said, tell me everything, and then we'll see. The morning sun broke over Maple Street with a brutality that felt almost personal. It streamed through the windows of the bungalow, illuminating the dust motes that danced in the air like tiny witnesses to the chaos that was about to unfold. I had barely slept, none of us had. Clara sat at the kitchen table, her fingers wrapped around a mug of cold coffee, her eyes hollow but alert. Peter was in the corner, pacing like a caged animal, his polished veneer finally cracked beyond repair. I had made a choice in the pre-dawn hours, standing in the overgrown yard of 14 Cedar Court. I had listened to Peter's desperate confession, his litany of my mother's sins, and I had decided to use him, not because I trusted him. I would never trust him, but because he was a weapon, and I was no longer afraid to wield weapons. Peter had given me everything. Bank statements, emails, recorded conversations. He had documented years of his own complicity, building a file that could destroy both him and my mother. He had done it out of fear, out of self-preservation, out of the desperate hope that he could escape the web he had helped weave. But his motivations didn't matter. The evidence did. "We'll go to the police in 2 hours," I said, my voice cutting through the silence. "We bring everything, the ledger, clause documents, Peter's files. We lay it all out, and we let them sort through the wreckage." Clara nodded slowly. "And then what?" "And then we wait. We let the system work. We trust that the truth is enough." Peter stopped pacing and looked at me, his face pale and drawn. "You're making a mistake, Charlotte. Your mother won't go down quietly. She'll fight. She'll destroy everyone in her path, including you." "Let her try," I said. "I've been destroyed by her my entire life. I'm still standing." At 9 o'clock sharp, we walked into the police station. The building was unremarkable, a squat brick structure with fluorescent lights and the faint smell of stale coffee. The officer at the front desk looked up as we approached, his expression shifting from boredom to curiosity as he took in the three of us, a disheveled woman in a hoodie, a wealthy-looking young woman with haunted eyes, and a man in an expensive suit, who looked like he was about to be sick. "I need to report a crime," I said. "Fraud, theft, conspiracy. I have evidence." The next few hours blurred together in a haze of paperwork and interviews. We were separated, questioned, cross. Peter's confession was recorded, his voice trembling as he detailed years of betrayal. Clara's documents were photocopied, her story corroborated by the evidence she had painstakingly gathered, and my ledger, the key that had unlocked everything, was analyzed by forensic accountants who confirmed what I already knew. Evelyn Vance had been stealing for decades. By noon, I was sitting in a sterile interview room, staring at the beige walls and wondering if any of this was real. A detective named Aradinez sat across from me, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She looked at me over the rim of her reading glasses and nodded slowly. "It's a solid case," she said. "We're going to arrest your mother today. Peter will be taken into custody as well, though we'll likely recommend leniency given his CO operation. Clara Ashford will be reunited with her family, and you, Charlotte, you've done something remarkable." I shook my head. I just didn't want to be afraid anymore. Detective Rios smiled, a small, genuine expression that softened her tired face. "That's more than most people ever achieve." By the time I left the station, the sun was beginning to set. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, a stunning backdrop to the chaos of the day. I stood on the step, breathing in the cool evening air, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace, but it didn't last. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. I opened it and felt my blood run cold. "Gone?" She took the CAR from the GA rage and read. "We don't know where she went." Lily, my younger sister. I had forgotten about her in the whirlwind of the past few days. She had always been our mother's favorite, the golden child who could do no wrong. But even Lily was reaching out now, her message tinged with fear and confusion. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Of course my mother had fled. She had always been a survivor, a predator who knew when to retreat and regroup. She wasn't going to let herself be caught that easily. She was going to run, to hide, to find a way to strike back. But where had she gone? The CAR was gone, which meant she had access to transportation. Her assets were frozen, but she had cash stashed somewhere, hidden in the same web of deception she had spent decades weaving. And she had Lily, her puppet, her pawn. I called Lily immediately. She answered on the first ring, her voice trembling. "Charlotte, what happened?" "Mom came home this morning in a panic. She was throwing things in a bag, muttering about betrayal and enemies. She wouldn't tell me where she was going. She just took the CAR and left." "Did she say anything else?" "Anything at all?" Lily hesitated. She said she was going to finish what she started. She said you would regret crossing her." "Charlotte, I'm scared. What did you do?" "I did the right thing," I said. "I exposed her crimes. She's going to prison." "Lily, she has nowhere to run. She has her safety deposit box," Lily said, her voice small. She mentioned it once. She said it was her insurance policy. The one thing no one could ever take from her. The safety deposit box. The same one that had been mentioned in the letter from SETI AR court. The one that held $2.5 million. My mother had spent decades bleeding that trust dry. But she hadn't taken it all. She had saved a portion, tucked it away as a final escape hatch. And now she was running for it. I knew where she was going. I had seen the address in the ledger. A small bank in a neighboring town that she had used for her offshore accounts. It was a long shot, but it was the only lead I had. Stay home, I said. Lock the doors. Don't let anyone in. I'm going to find her. I hung up and ran. The bungalow was too far. I would never make it on foot. But as I sprinted down the street, I saw a familiar, a beat-up Honda Civic, parked in the driveway of a neighbor's house. My car. The car my mother had threatened to sell, the car that had been taken from me. The neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Henderson, was standing on her porch, looking confused. Dr. Is this yours? A man dropped it off this morning. He said it belonged to you. I didn't ask questions, I didn't thank her. I grabbed the keys from her outstretched hand, and jumped into the driver's seat. The engine sputtered, then Roe read to life. I peeled out of the driveway. Tires, my heart pounding in my chest. The drive took 20 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. I pushed the car to its limits, weaving through traffic, running red lights, praying I wasn't too late. The bank was a small, unassuming building on the outskirts of town. The kind of place that catered to wealthy clients who valued discretion. I pulled into the parking lot just as my mother emerged from the front door. She was carrying a small leather satchel, her face a mask of triumph. She stopped when she saw me, her expression shifting from surprise to cold fury. She said, her voice dripping with venom. You just don't know when to quit, do you? Neither do you, I replied, stepping out of the car. But this ends now, Mom, I have the police on their way. You're not getting away this time. She laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. They can't touch me. I have everything I need right here. She patted the satchel. Cash documents, a new identity. I've been planning for this moment for years. You think you've won. You've only made me stronger. I took a step closer. What about Lily? What about your daughter? Are you really going to abandon her? Leave her to deal with the wreckage of your crimes? Something flickered in my mother's eyes, a crack in her armor. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. Lily will be fine, she said. She's always been the strong one, the one who actually listened to me. She sneered. You were always the disappointment. Always too weak, too soft. You never had what it takes to survive. Maybe not. But I have something you'll never have. I have people who love me, people who believe in me. You have nothing but money and far. And neither of those will save you. For a moment my mother was silent. She looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw the loneliness in her eyes. The desperate emptiness that had driven her to destroy everyone around her. She was a woman who had built a fortress of lies, only to find herself trapped inside it. Goodbye Charlotte, she said finally. She turned and walked toward her car, the satchel clutched to her chest. I didn't stop her, I didn't need to. The police arrived moments later. Their sirens cutting through the evening air like a scream. My mother was surrounded, her escape cut off. She looked back at me, her face a mask of defiance, but I saw the defeat in her eyes. As she was led away in handcuffs, she met my gaze one last time. You'll regret this, she said. You'll understand what I was trying to protect you from. I shook my head. You were never protecting me. You were protecting yourself, and now it's over. She didn't respond. She was led into the back of a police car, the satchel confiscated as evidence. I stood in the parking lot, watching her disappear, and felt a strange sense of closure. I didn't go home instead. I drove to 14 A. The mansion was still there, crumbling and forgotten, but it no longer felt like a mausoleum. It felt like a monument to the past. A reminder of everything that had been lost and everything that had been found. I walked through the overgrown yard, past the roses my mother had once planted, their petals now wilted and brown. I climbed the creaking porch steps and pushed open the front door. The foyer was key. But I didn't need light to know where I was going. I climbed the stairs to the study, the room where Clara had revealed the truth, where I had found the ledger, where everything had begun. I sat down at the desk, and pulled out the letter I had found on that first day, the fragment that had rotted it all. The words were faded, but I could still read them. The sum of 500,000 is to remain in trust until the designated beneficiary is located. The designated beneficiary Clara Ashford, she had been found, and the money, what was left of it, would finally be returned to its rightful owner. I folded the letter and tucked it into my pocket. As I walked out of the mansion, I paused at the front door and looked back at the dusty foyer. The chandelier was still draped in cobwebs, the wallpaper still peeling, the stairs still groaning with every step, but the house no longer felt haunted. It felt like a sanctuary, a place where the truth had been hidden and finally unearthed. I drove back to the bungalow as the moon began to rise. My car was in the driveway. My home was, and my mother was in custody. But as I stepped through the front door, I saw something that made my heart stop. On the kitchen counter, where my mother had once laid out her itemized list of debts, there was a single object, the key to 14C, glinting in the dim light. Beneath it, a note in my mother's handwriting. The truth has a way of finding its way home. I read at the key, my mind reeling. How had it gotten here? My mother was in police custody. She couldn't have left it. But then I remembered the neighbor, Mrs. and the car that had mysteriously appeared in her driveway. My mother had been planning this for years. She had left contingencies, escape routes, hidden messages, and now, even in defeat, she was still playing games. I picked up the key and turned it over in my hand. It was cold and heavy, a tangible reminder of everything I had uncovered. I didn't know what it meant, why she had left it, or what she expected me to do with it. But I knew one thing for certain, the truth had found its way home. And I was ready for whatever came next. I walked to the window and looked out at the dark street, at the quiet houses and the sleeping neighborhood. Somewhere out there, my mother was in a cell, her world crumbling around her, and somewhere else, Clara Ashford was finally free. I had won the battle, but the war was far from over. The key in my hand felt like a promise, a new beginning, a reminder that the truth, no matter how buried, always finds a way to surface. I slipped the key into my pocket, next to the letter from said AR court, and the house on Maple Street was quiet, the roses blooming in the moonlight. But I was no longer the woman who had once felt trapped within these walls. I was the woman who had broken free, and I was just getting started.